to the pandemic, I was a nomad. Every week, I'm in like 1, 2, 3 countries. So it's really, really bad. Bad for the family, especially. Okay.
Surya, can I just check, reconfirm that we will stop in 1 hour so that we're all on the same
Yes.
page? Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Wonderful. 12 o'clock.
I think yes. Let's
Wonderful.
think we are on time and good to start. So let me give an intro. Welcome all again to the session on winning with Azure Hybrid using Azure Stack HCI, and we have Noel with us and his team to take us through the topics and giving the demos and walking us through the topics. So let us hear from him. Over to you.
Thank you, Suraj. Thank you. A warm welcome to all of you coming across from the region. Right. First and foremost, I'm grateful for Suraj for reaching out. It was actually a very warm surprise, a very good surprise, right? Because rarely we get this kind of opportunity. But I was also a little bit cautious because, as you know, in the world of security these days, with all the cyber crime and so on, I was concerned whether Suraj was actually a scammer. So I was actually behaving very unpredictable. I was trying to see whether I can throw off any scammers who was catching on to people like this. And one of the reasons why I'm so cautious is because our name, our email address, even our mobile numbers, I'm sure is found in the dark web. All right. And it's not surprising that we regularly get scam calls. Okay. So I'm extremely cautious. I do leave a very strong trail with all my emails and numbers. As you can see, I've put in my email and my mobile number for you to reach back to me. And sometimes these kind of details are valuable details to cyber criminals, right? So that's why I'm extremely cautious. So I'm sorry, Suraj, if I was being very cold and very distancing and difficult to work with, because I wanted to see whether you were really a real person. Okay. All right. Now, first and foremost, what is Azure Hybrid? Okay, so the word Azure Hybrid basically means on-premise technology, like your Windows server, your data center, your server room service can reach out to Azure. Okay, so the word hybrid, if you want, is basically having technology on-premise connecting to Azure, either reaching outwards or from Azure coming down to touch your on-premise environment. So that's the definition, if you want, of the word Azure Hybrid. Okay, I will define the Azure Stack HCI a little bit more, so at least you get to know in a better detail, all right, what exactly the technology is. Now,
Your share screen not come up yet.
Thanks. Thanks for telling me. I forgot to share. I was so excited to get started. Okay. Can you see my shared screen now?
Yes,
okay.
Yes. Come up already.
Thank you. Thanks for catching it early, right? And not like halfway through my content, right? Okay, so this is Azure Hybrid, right? My starting slide for the session. Okay, now I'm a strong believer of being a solution to as many situations as possible for my customers, for my partners, for my distributors, even for my principals, people like Microsoft, for example. I do a lot of work for people like Microsoft, HPE, Intel, Dell, and progressively even into some of the newer multinationals like AMD, for example. Right. So that's the kind of work that we do. So I'm a strong believer also that being part of that solution, when we ask, we seek, we knock, right? I believe we get. Okay. So therefore, looking out into the world today, we are seeing customers early days when they went to the cloud, whether it's Azure or whether it's AWS or even Google, many of them, according to IDC, have started to pivot back down to an on-prem environment. Now, why that actually happened, if you double click on this link and you go into the website, it will actually tell you that many of these customers went to cloud without doing a thorough assessment and understanding of the environment. So they actually went to cloud totally not prepared to what was going to come out from that particular journey. So many of them actually came back. Now we believe that by them moving those workloads back from cloud to the on-prem environment, some of those services continue to have to work with cloud resources. So therefore, when IDC and Gartner came out with this data, 47% of enterprises are replacing outdated. That's not surprising, because like a Windows Server 208 and 28R2, when close, if you want, past the end of support, all right, in January, just last month, all right, so many of those older technology need to be refreshed. So that's why a lot of the work that we're doing for people like HPE, Microsoft, and so forth, we're actually talking about end of support. How do you migrate workloads like AD from 208R2 forward into 2022, file servers from those older technology to 2022 and so forth. And we do have some demos to show in that particular area. Now, 90% of enterprises remain hybrid. It's not surprising. Ultimately, we believe it could be even closer to 95, 96, 97% of customers. Now, you might be wondering, then what's all this fuss about cloud? It's just that there are more and more organizations realizes that cloud has a role to play, but they have to be very careful. They need to understand their workloads on-premise very well before they move it to cloud. Otherwise, they get bitten. Okay, just like renting a car. If you rented a car, even on those days that you don't need the rental, you still have to pay. You cannot go to the rental car company and say, oh, by the way, the 7 days I rented the car, actually 3 of those days I didn't use it at all. You think the rental car will say, oh, that's great. So 7 days you rented, 3 days you don't use, all right? So you only pay for 4 days. That probably ain't gonna happen, right? So in the same way, when you move workloads to cloud or you're running services in the cloud, right, you cannot deny that you use it. Okay, that's one thing. If you're not using it, you have to shut it down. You have to disengage like the storage from the virtual machines and stuff like that to make sure that it doesn't continue to consume resources, and therefore, as a customer, you continue to have to pay. Right, so those things are things that customers learn along the way, and some of them were bitten. So some of those workloads, they decided to move them back down. That's why the IDC report was quite accurate to report customers who got bitten and decided to move them back down. So when they have workloads in their own data center and yet still connecting, that's hybrid already from a Microsoft definition perspective. Now, the third data point, 75% of enterprises' data will be created at the edge, meaning you're going to see a lot of little locations, potentially 1 server, 2 servers, doing things like AI, machine learning, inferencing, okay, and so forth. And those are going to permeate around the world, right? Big data centers like the hyperscalers like Microsoft, AWS, and Google will continue to grow. A lot of our service providers will also continue to grow, right? But you're going to see a lot of small little sites pop up. Okay, for whatever the reasons, the key drivers are reasons why these situations are happening. Customers got old systems they have to update. Regulations in governments, in federal banks, and so forth are not changing fast enough. So customers continue to be restricted in what they can go to cloud with. So that's why regulations and data sovereignty will continue to be a big thing, right? Latency and technical hurdles in many countries, I'm sure even some of you in those countries you are in right now, there are latency with your networks, performance, and even congestions. Too many users, the pipe is not growing big fast enough. Okay, so these are key things that we need to be aware of. So my name is Noel. I used to work for Microsoft Malaysia. I was there for 15 years. In the last 10 years since exiting Microsoft, I have been working in my own company, but still supporting Microsoft across the region, from Australia, New Zealand, all the way to India, from the north, Korea and Japan, south, all the way to Indonesia. And I believe in the next 12 to 18 months, we will also be going into China. So there's a good chance we will touch this entire region in a really significant way. And I would really like to appeal to all of you to listen very carefully to what we are covering with you so that you can learn and be part of this exciting momentum. Okay, now, all of these are not possible without the team that I'm part of. Okay, so we have Cole, we have Lorraine, and we have Vic probably in this session, right? Chua and BK, and also there are others that are probably not here this time around. Okay, so hopefully in future we'll get to share more with you. But what is important is we believe in inspiring people. And out of that, we hope to be able to ignite a passion or spark in your heart and in your mind. Okay, and through that, hopefully we can help you take off 3, 2, 1 in an amazing way. So that was the purpose, and that was the vision and the mission that I had for this session, to help you truly take off in an exciting and amazing way. Okay, so yesterday night I did a session on ChatGPT together with my team, right? From the feedback, it looks like it was quite interactive. All right, and it was interesting because this is a very viral topic today. All right, so if any of you are interested to hear more about this, you can always reach out to us. I can share the recording with you, or we can do a session for you another time. Okay, now what is important here is I didn't talk about ChatGPT in isolation. I talked about it from the perspective of even Microsoft being very interested in ChatGPT. Recently, they pledged an investment of 10 billion US dollars to the company called OpenAI that owns ChatGPT. And in very recent days, they have already released a solution called Azure OpenAI Service. Okay, so all these came out in the very recent last few days. So as IT people, I know we are always very hungry for the latest, greatest. So these are the latest, greatest things that's happening. But from a Microsoft perspective, AI is not anything new. As you can see, they started embarking on this back in 2016, towards the second quarter, or rather, yeah, correct, H2, second half of 2016. And in recent days, in January, which was just a few days ago, they have already released an Azure service called Azure OpenAI Service. So hopefully some of you will start to go in there and start playing with it and give Microsoft feedback on what you think about it. And just this morning or yesterday, I can't remember now, Vic alerted us to Microsoft Teams already using OpenAI capability with GPT. Okay, so these are the speed and the pace, the cloud pace that is taking hold. And I urge you to go to this particular site, right, where Satya Nadella talks about doing more with less. Now, some of you may have heard this term, doing more with less, and probably very puzzled, right? I know that for a fact because when I use those terms, especially in face-to-face events, it's easier to see the body language of people versus a webinar session like this. Okay, so doing more with less means what? With the technology like Windows Server 2022 or Azure Stack HCI, there are so many things packed or bundled into it. Doing more with less means maximizing what you deploy from that single solution without adding on a lot of different third-party capabilities. Okay, so that's the key thing with doing more with less from a Microsoft perspective, from a Satya Nadella's perspective. And even prior to Satya Nadella, this term, doing more with less, have been used at least 2 other times, even when I was still in Microsoft Malaysia. So it's not anything new. It's very much a DNA of Microsoft, if I could punctuate it in that way. Okay, so now we have a user group on LinkedIn that will love to have you. So click on the QR code, join us there. It's called Microsoft Hybrid User Group. So it's not surprising, right? So we call it Azure Hybrid. So we have a user group called Microsoft Hybrid User Group. Okay, we also have a YouTube channel. So join us on this YouTube channel. We are constantly adding more content to it because we believe in sharing. And a lot of our sharing actually happens in the evening from 8:30 to 9:30 p.m. Malaysia time, GMT +8. All right. And in recent days, we have been uploading a lot of content. So there's 90% more than like 6 months ago all right, and so forth. Now, to give you a context of where we're coming in, we need to understand what is disturbing our customers. What are the dangers that our customers are facing? So what do you think those are? We have COVID-19. We just come out from a pandemic. So we are in the post-pandemic era at the moment. But that also means many of our customers are still transforming, pivoting, if you want, and they're going from a work from home to work from anywhere. That means their users are now not limited to working from home, they can work from anywhere. But we also have a disturbing increased trends of cyber threats. So on the top right corner, we see a lot of data breaches and all those other things that's still coming along. Now, when we talk about doing more with less, we need to understand what are all the multi-layered security found in Windows Server, found in Azure Stack HCI, so that before you start adding lots and lots of third-party solutions to it, use what you have in that particular solution. That's doing more with less. Now, I'm sure many of you also know the conflict that came in last year with Ukraine and Russia. Right? Some of these conflicts are not just contained in those countries. Some of the other countries in the region are also fighting in one way or another, right? With insurgency and so forth. All right. And then, of course, we have calamities, right? Not so long ago, I was just telling my wife about the massive flooding in Pakistan. Do we have anyone from Pakistan in this session? Right. When I saw the massive gush of water, right, even taking away bridges and so forth, my heart sunk, right? The pain, the losses and all that must be massive, right? For a country like Pakistan. But if that happened in any other country, I'm sure it would have been a disaster as well. Now, the other disaster that we're seeing, and that's very closely tied to cyber threats, is end of support. So Windows Server 208, 2.8.2, as I mentioned, the extended security update ended last month. So there's absolutely nothing left. Okay, don't expect to get security updates for 208, 2.8.2. But some customers have said, can you please extend? So Microsoft is giving you 1 more year. If you move your 208, 2.8.2 to Azure, into the infrastructure as a service on Azure, you can get 1 more year, right? But that will be absolutely the last year, okay? But Windows Server 2012, 2012.2 is coming to end of support in October this year. So customers don't have a lot of time. So for those of you who are working in an end user organization, please start exploring. That means learning about it, how to migrate. Before you go to your management and say, I want money, I want funding, I want budget to do these things, learn it first, okay? Then go ask them. Show them the disasters that can happen, right? If they don't do anything about it. So this was something I shared in a webinar yesterday for HPE and Microsoft. Medibank, the largest private insurer in Australia, was attacked in October last year. 4 million of their customers' information were stolen, if you want, okay? And this has become escalated into a very big thing because firstly, they said they won't pay, which is the right thing to do. Don't pay the hackers, right? Don't pay based on their demands, okay? And they did, okay? That is the recommended best practice. If your data gets locked by ransomware, don't pay to the attackers, all right? But there are problems that sometimes comes with that as well, okay? Around the world, fewer and fewer people are not paying, but the attacks are not going down, the attacks are going up. Because even the attackers, the cyber criminals, have KPI. They want to keep their revenue going up. Okay, so the attacks are going to increase, not reduce. That's why it's not surprising to see so many attacks, like those mentioned, like the Guardian, Royal Mail, Sick Kids, which is a hospital in Canada. Right, so many of these things are creating problems. Right, and these attacks are not just from the perspective of single extortion, it's like double extortion as well. Okay, so some of these things may be new to you. Sorry, I don't have time to go through in details. But even as Medibank being a victim to cybercrime, but there are organizations within Australia that's going to try to sue them for the data breach. So they're accusing Medibank to be a culprit for not being careful enough with customer information. So the world of cyber threats is actually very scary. You may be a victim, but yet you could be sued as a culprit for not being careful enough to protect the data of your customers, right? And if they are found guilty, they can be fined by the Australian government for 50 million Australian dollars. That's a lot of money in it. For a big organization like Medibank, even though they may have money, but giving away $50 million on top of all the trouble that you need to recover your system, terrible. It's disgusting, okay? So around the world, you're seeing this cybercrime thing becoming very, very serious. So now how's that to do with hybrid? When you run your applications, your data on-premise, like say on Azure Stack HCI, which is a HCI solution, you may find that using cloud security very compelling because Microsoft has a very strong cloud security offering under the branding of Microsoft Defender. It's Microsoft Defender for IoT, for storage, for cloud, for endpoint, for so many things that is incredible to the point where you think that security is needed everywhere, and that's true. So if I were to go down the path of how to recommend you to get started, I suggest you look at these ones here. From Azure File Sync to Azure Active Directory through Azure Site Recovery, Azure Backup, and Azure Update Management. This is, think of it as like an a la carte. Like you go to a restaurant and it says, I want to pick this one, and this one. But if you're not sure what to pick, then I suggest you go look at option number 2. Go with Azure Arc. If you go with Azure Arc comes with a bunch of different Azure services, including even security with Microsoft Defender for Cloud. All right, so you can pick up all that through just adopting Arc into your strategy for Azure Hybrid. Right, just a very quick overview, right? Because right after this, we want to go into demos. All right, so from a hybrid perspective, we have the capability to deliver on disaster readiness requirements, right? So all these floodings, fires, earthquakes, even hurricanes and tsunamis and so forth, you need to help your customer put together a disaster readiness plan. Okay, so built into the solution, we have these ones down the bottom. We have things like storage replica, we have stretch cluster, we have Hyper-V replica, and so forth. In Azure, we have Azure Backup, Azure Site Recovery, and in recent days, we also have Azure Files. Through Azure File Sync, we can do DR4 file services, right? And of course, from a security perspective, we have hybrid security. So security on-premise, like secure core server, and many other multi-layered security within the technology itself with Windows Server 2022, as well as Azure Stack HCI. And of course, in the cloud, as mentioned, there are many things you can do, right? There is also an SIEM tool from Microsoft called Sentinel, Microsoft Sentinel, right? So there are lots and lots of tools. From a patch management perspective, on-premise, we have WSUS that is built inside Windows Server, all right? We also have the failover cluster update, all right? And then, of course, some of you may be familiar with System Center Configuration Manager, but from Azure perspective, we have Azure Update Management, and there's a new service coming, which is currently in preview. Cole may have time to tell you a little bit about that. But from a virtual desktop perspective, we have RDS, Remote Desktop Services, that is part of Windows Server, and that's been there for the longest time. And of course, in recent days, all right, in the last 1 or 2 years, Microsoft introduced Azure Virtual Desktop, which basically means you can run virtual desktop in Azure itself. And currently, we are still previewing, all right, which basically means in beta, all right, Azure Virtual Desktop in Azure Stack HCI. So these are the virtual desktop solution, but not forgetting, some of you may know there is something called Windows 365, right? Windows 365 runs on Azure. Okay, there is no Windows 365 that runs on-premise today. All right. Now, last but not least, we also have the ability to do containerization. That means running apps in containers, which is very much leaner and meaner than running it in a virtual machine, meaning you can pack in, you can have highly dense virtual machines with containers, lots and lots of them. Okay, whether they are Windows containers or Linux containers. And to manage that, we have Kubernetes. So in Azure, we have something called Azure Kubernetes Service. And on-premise on Azure Stack HCI, we also have Azure Kubernetes Service. So we have AKS both in Azure as well as in on-prem. Okay, so that's the mixture, if you want, of hybrid services that you can find. So Arc together with a bunch of services to allow you to support multi-cloud, edge, and on-premise deployment, as well as, if you want, all of these things that you can run within Azure Stack HCI itself. Now, I lifted some of these slides from the HPE Microsoft deck that we did yesterday, right? Because I didn't have enough time to refresh everything, right? So from Windows Server virtual machines, Linux virtual machines, you have the Kubernetes to manage containers. We have Azure Virtual Desktop, right? And of course, you can connect to Azure services, okay? And very importantly, because it's hybrid, you need to have physical hardware. So what I've shown you here are the latest HPE Gen 11 servers, but Dell, Lenovo, and many other brands also have servers that run Azure Stack HCI very, very well. So just to be fair, okay? These provides very powerful solutions for customers who want to do on-premise deployment of hyperconverged, basically combining compute and storage together into a single solution and be able to reach out and connect to Azure. So we have very powerful, and performance of this solution is second to none, right? We are the fastest HCI money can buy, all right? And we're willing to show you in subsequent sessions how we do the benchmarking and so forth, which is exactly the same as how the Microsoft product team would do it. So from security, we also give you very high reliability. So through some of the demos we're going to show you very shortly now, right? We will jump into that, okay? So to summarize, we can run a whole bunch of different type of virtual machines, okay? From Windows for VDI, Windows Server, and even Linux, right? We can also connect to Azure through Windows Admin Center, which is the free management tool. And of course, we also can run those PaaS services like Azure Virtual Desktop, AKS, for example, right? And even manage Azure Stack HCI from the Azure portal, right? Whether it's through Azure Arc or through Windows Admin Center that is now available on the Azure portal, as well as we can even run SQL Server managed instances on-premise plus other cognitive services and data services. So this gives us a very complete set of PaaS services together with on-premise virtual machines to give you a very rich solution and yet a very affordable solution, and still be able to scale outwards, even reaching out into Azure for services that you cannot get on-premise, right? So that gives us a very powerful starting point. So to take our demos further, all right, we are using this thing like a game. Okay, we're going to run this wheel, right? We're going to spin this wheel a couple of times, and hopefully that lands in an area where we're going to show you a demo. So there are 5 areas here, just like the dangers that I showed you, right? So the end of support was one of the dangers with the 208 R2, with the Windows Server 2012 R2 that's going end of support in October this year. And of course, we have calamities, which are the disasters, the natural disasters. And then we have conflict like the one that's happening still in Ukraine and Russia. We have cybercrime, we have COVID, right? So if I were to spin this, okay, spin this and spin this, okay? So let's say cybercrime is something that's really hurting you and your customers today. What are the things that you can do within Windows Server and Azure Stack HCI to help your customers overcome that? Okay, that's a key thing, right? So, Cole, can I get your help to show us a compelling demo around the Microsoft solution that can help us overcome cybercrime?
Yeah, no problem. Let me
Thank
share my
you, Cole.
screen. Yeah. Yeah, can you see the screen?
Yes.
All right. So thanks everyone. And I'm actually Cole. I'm a technology specialist from my DSC, and I'm also the so-called the demo specialist that working closely together with Noel by supporting him with a lot of demo, R&D, and solution architecture. Right. So, right, thanks for the great sharing that shared by Noel for the past 30 minutes, right? And as the wheel of fortune now is actually spin out in the cybercrime and about the cybersecurity awareness, right? So there's one area that I want to bring out is how the bad guy, right, the hacker out there is actually targeting about the uh, vulnerability that available in our system, like for example, the SQL Server 2012 R2, which has been end of support last year, July. And if the customer, right, is not page or even update the SQL Server up to the latest and the environment is not secure enough, and this will become the target where the hacker will actually get use of the vulnerability and gain the elevation of the privilege and even perform the remote code execution to run something like what I'm going to show you, right? So as an illustration, right, if a bad guy is actually entering your network and trying to actually steal some information from your server, right? For example, your SQL server, right? So what basically the bad guy will do is the person will actually run the scanning tools and check which other server is available and which service that is running, for example, the SQL server and it's not paged to the latest, right? Because the bad guy can actually go through the dictionary attack and go through the vulnerability scanning and get to know that this particular server running on certain version with a certain build number is not paged to the latest. And the person can actually gain access control by elevating the privilege and run the code execution remotely into this the victim machine. Right? Then on the application perspective, right, and the bad guy can actually extract the data, right, view the data, and even delete the data, and so on, right? And what even further, right, the bad guy is actually gain full access control to the system with appropriate access, right? And from there, the bad guy can actually create an account and make that account as an administrator and not even become aware by the administrator that actually monitoring the system if some of the detection is not in place. Right? So this is how serious is it for the criminal, for the cybersecurity awareness that need to be aware by the customer. Right? So apart from that, right, how we actually can help customer to prevent this, for example, by uh, buying the extended security update, by moving the SQL Server into the Azure Stack HCI platform and get benefit of this so-called the Azure benefit and with the free extended security update for 1 more year. Right? So this is some information that I wanted to show you about the pricing for subscribing the extended security update. And as you can see here, it's actually quite expensive. It's about 75% for the full licensing for the first year, and it will actually add up more for the subsequent years, right? So, so quite expensive, right?
Gary.
So let's move forward. Yeah. So let's see, show you a scenario where once the customer, right, who running the end of support SQL Server, for example, the SQL Server 2012 R2, and the customer is moving and migrating the SQL Server into the virtual machine and run on top of the Azure Stack HCI cluster, right? They can actually get benefit of the Azure benefit capability that provided by Azure Stack HCI and actually receive another year of free extended security upgrade from Microsoft, and will be able for them to actually download the security patches, right, security update, and so on, which is available for the Windows Server 2012 R2, and allowing the administrator to to be better prepared and to be fixed patching the server and making sure that the vulnerability is crossed out and not waiting for the bad guy to actually knock your door and actually get access to it, right? So this is the example, the demo that I want to go through that, right? So the virtual machine is now running on top of the Azure Stack HCI, and there's a feature called Azure Benefit in the Azure Stack HCI cluster, right? You can configure it using the Windows Admin Center, a free web-based and remote administration tools, right? From here, you can see that the virtual machine that running my SQL Server 2012 R2 is already enabled with this Azure Benefit capability, right? And from here, let me actually show you how it looks like in the Azure portal, especially here, right? Because the Azure Stack HCI cluster is an ARC-enabled server. It's an ARC-enabled cluster, right? The onboarded SQL Server will actually be monitored by the Azure Arc, and here, as you can see here, it's been extended, for 1 more year, right? Let me zoom in for a little bit. You see, so one is entering the information about my SQL Server into the Azure portal under this manage resources, right? I can actually receive a free extended security update for 1 more year, right? So this is the tag that you need to enter while you add the SQL Server into the managed environment, right? And you can receive the update, right? So as an illustration here, you can see that
So,
this
Cole,
is the
Cole,
yes.
yeah. Before you go further, right, you notice that
Yeah.
it says July 2023, right? July 2023 is less than 12 months, is it? So when was the start date of this end of support for that 1 year?
So I actually enabled this server on on July 10th, right?
Yeah.
On year 2022.
2022.
So I
Yeah.
received 1 year free extended security update, right? So
Correct.
the 1 year
Correct.
is counted on the day that I actually activate these
Yep.
features in the virtual machine that with the SQL Server 2022 that is running.
Yeah.
From there, it will extend for 1 more year.
Correct. So now to add to what Cole was saying, all right, the SQL Server 2012 end of support was in July 2022. So when that end of support happened, Cole activated this free extended security update by running it on top of Azure Stack HCI. Okay, so that's the series of steps that he had to go through to make sure that the SQL Server 2012 continue to get security update for another year. Okay, you cannot just run this anywhere and then say, oh, I want the extra year, so I'm going to turn on the Azure benefit. You don't have an Azure benefit entitlement unless you run the SQL Server 2012 on top of Azure Stack HCI OS. Okay?
Yeah, got it.
Thanks, Cole.
Yeah, no problem. So let me fast forward a little bit, right? So once the server is actually onboarded and is managed by the Azure Arc and the extended security update, those updates which are available were actually listed in the available security update page, and the administrator can download it and actually or even manage it by using the app, right, and to schedule the update, right? So that's the demo that I would like to show in the perspective of the criminal crime and cybersecurity awareness on how we actually protect and making sure that our server is always patched to the latest. All right, over to you now.
Thank you, Cole. Thank you.
Yeah,
I was just thinking, in the interest of time, instead of me spinning the wheel again, you want to show us another security demo? Would you have your Defender for Cloud? Maybe you can go through.
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
So awesome. Thank you.
I would like to show you manageability, a security management capability that provided by the hybrid scenario, right? Which is for using this Microsoft Defender for Cloud, right? It's a solution that we call it a Cloud Security Posture Management Solution, a CSPM, or we call it and it's also a Cloud Workload Protection Platform, or we call it CWPP, right? For the customer to manage their Azure resources, on-premise resources, and also the resources that connected from other cloud services, right? So this is a recording from how I actually manage the environment, right? So the Defender for Cloud is a tool for security posture management and threat protection, right? So it will strengthen the security posture of the environment, right? And with the tools needed to harden the customer resources, check the security posture, right? Protect against the cyber attack and so on, right? So let's take a look on policy compliance menu. Right, so the list of recommendation is enabled and supported by the Azure Security Benchmark, which provide a set of guidelines for a security on compliant best practice based on the common compliance framework. Right, so from here, the administrator can actually enable and turn on different benchmark, the security benchmark, and making sure that the environment is always compliant to the required compliance standard. Right. So let's move forward and talk about the secure score. Right. The score that how it actually enable allowing the administrator to actually further improve the security posture and the environment. Right. So the more security feature, the capability that you turn on, then you earn certain point and you will get actually the higher score, which means if your environment is getting safer, the higher security and you will get higher point, right? So the secure score dashboard actually providing you the overall understanding about how to improve the overall security posture by providing you the list of the machine that still not compliant to certain security requirement and show you the information about it on what is the recommendation, what is the remediation process, and even provide you the step to actually fix it and actually improve it, right? And furthermore, it can also use the security center to configure if security alert on if the certain issue has been detected, a certain incident has been detected about certain how to say that a certain security setting is not been set properly. You can always alert the administrator to take a look at it. And of course, we have an inventory list, right? And always provide this as a single glass of pen, right, for administrators to actually monitor and manage the entire environment and to making sure that all of them is up to the compliance standard and with a proper security setting. Right? So that's all for me from the perspective of using the Microsoft Defender for Cloud to manage the environment. All right, over to you now.
Thank you, Cole. Thank you for the quick overview of Defender for Cloud. Right. I know there's so many Defenders for different things available from Microsoft, but I think in the interest of time, let's try and pivot a little bit to an area that is particularly urgent and requires a lot of attention. Right. So what I wanted to do next was to spin the wheel again. And this time I want us to think about what is important from the perspective of end of support. Now, we talked about the SQL Server earlier that Cole showed you, right? But how about migrating some of those workloads? Because some workloads are not so critical, if you want, from retaining the version. SQL Server, I think, is one of those that is absolutely critical. Just by migrating the SQL Server, you potentially create a bigger problem. So that's why moving the SQL Server from its current state to running it on Azure Stack HCI makes sense, because you're not changing the SQL Server version, you're preserving everything that is in the SQL Server, including how the applications will talk to the SQL Server. But there are services within Windows Server that we believe that is what we call low-hanging fruits. It's easy to migrate. All right. So with that, I would like to ask Cole to come back again to show us some of these interesting migration scenarios which are yet easy. Right? They're interesting and easy. Right? Not interesting and difficult. Okay. So Cole, help us with that. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks. Thanks, Noel. And on sharing about this, right? So it's very critical, right, for a scenario like if the customer would like to perform the migration for their AD, right? For example, the customer will curious, oh, I bought a new server, right, with the latest Windows Server 2022. How are we going to migrate that all my Active Directory object to the new version of the domain controller? Right, so this is something that I wanted to show you, right? So instead of using the Impress upgrade, right, And this is the process where I adding the domain controller running the latest version of Windows Server to the existing AD folders, right, and transfer the flexible single master operation role, right, and then retire the existing domain controller, right, running the legacy version of the Windows Server operating system, right, without downtime for user or resources. And the same ADDS structure is actually maintained, right? So these are the demo that I want to walk through together with you, right? So in this environment, I have the AD, right? Currently have two domain controller, which is the Windows Server 2008 R2, and the domain controller, which is the Windows Server 2012 R2. Right? Pretty all right. Yeah, that's right. Customer bought a new server, install a Windows Server 2012, 2022, right? Now, this is what the customer is going to do, right? So once everything is ready to go, right, the customer will actually just need to join the server into the existing domain as a domain controller. Sorry, not become the domain controller first. It will become the member server first, right? And after that, it will actually install the Active Directory roles. And after that, we'll promote this server to become the domain controller. Let me fast forward a little bit, right? All right, so the server is joined to the domain, become the member server, all right? And after that, once the server is started, right, the administrator will start to add the required role into this member server, right? So in this scenario, we'll actually, because we want to promote this new server, right, into the, become a new domain controller into the existing domain. So we'll add the Active Directory domain services role, right? So once the role is added, right, we can actually with all the default settings selected and select the features to install, right? Fast forward a little bit. And once a feature is installed, right, so what the administrator need to do is they just need to promote this server to become the new domain controller, right? So this is a widget-based guided way on helping customer to actually migrate the Active Directory to the new environment, right? From here, administrator is selecting that this server will become the new domain controller in the existing folders in the existing domain, right? So this is a administrative restore password that the administrator will use, right, on the existing domain. And from here, we can the administrator can actually guided by the widget with all how is that well-defined default setting, like for example the DNS server installation, right? And you can select you want to actually replicate the AD object from any of the existing domain controller, right? However, I can actually let the widget to actually dynamically decide I can actually replicate from any controller, right? Any domain controller, right? So basically all setting done, right? Just click next and the widget will actually help to validate all the setting, right? Even though even including the IP setting, all the DNS setting that are required, right? So once the prerequisite is past the validation requirement, right, you just click install, and that's it. Sit and wait for the server to be ready, right? And of course, not as simple as that, right? Actually, the widget help to do a lot of preparation, a lot of setting, where previously the administrator need to perform the same task by typing them into the command prompt and making sure that all them are running, right? So something like preparing the forest, preparing the schema, right? And preparing the domain. These are the commands that you need to prepare to type in the command prompt previously, right? And of course, the widget will also help you to install the DNS server, and checking through all the group policy, right? The group policy object. Web starts. Once everything is done, it will actually start to replicating the domain schema from the existing domain controller, right? As well, the widget will also help you the environment to actually configure the required DNS record, right? And perform some system hardening process, right? So once everything is ready, right? So you actually restart, right? Okay, fast forward a little bit. Right, so the server will restart and the administrator will log in and check whether the new domain controller is up and running. Right, so as you can see from the left-hand side panel here from the server manager, the ADDS menu is right. So which means the ADDS service is on. Right, the DNS service is up and running. Right, we can also log into the DNS server manager and making sure that all required records are be installed, right? And furthermore, right, the administrator will actually go to the Active Directory users and computer and making sure that the new domain controller is added into the domain controller OU. And from this point, right, the customers, the administrator can actually start to actually migrate the operation master role, right, for respective services, right? So this is how easy is it and pretty simple, right? For customers, you're actually using the widget-based kind of installations method to migrate the Active Directory, right, from the existing domain, right, domain controller to the new domain controller, and also upgrade the domain functionality level to a newer version. All right, so that's all for me from the demo perspective, and over to you now.
Thank you, Cole. Thank you. Thank you
No
for
problem.
the interesting demo on how easy it is to move Active Directory off the old version. So
Yeah.
the tool is built inside Windows Server, right? So there's no additional tool the customer has to buy. There's nothing they have to be disturbed by with the change, right? Now, there's a question that Vic just alerted me to, right? In regards to if you have a virtual machine on-premise running on top of Azure Stack HCI, and how would you go about exposing this server, right? There are a couple of ways to do it, but this immediately came to mind, right? If you have a site-to-site VPN between your on-premise environment to Azure, potentially you can use this Azure Network Adapter to help you. Right now, obviously, to get that solution down more solidly for the POC, for the pilot, or even for the project, I suggest you build a small environment to play around with these technologies. So it will be a site-to-site VPN and also Azure Network Adapter, if you want, in order to achieve that. Okay, so that was the end of support scenario that Cole just covered off. Okay, so I'm thinking, right, what else can we do, right? There are lots of important areas that customers are being affected.
I think I have some input about the question just now where
Yes,
the
please,
Rajit
go
asked
ahead.
about, right? Because you see, the virtual machine is running on top of the Azure Stack HCI, and
Yes.
it's running the accounting software that going to be shared by the corporate colleagues and staff within the organization, right? We don't think that AVD is also one of the great solutions that with
Absolutely.
the capability to how say that perform something like the remote desktop that allowing the customer to actually access the environment and using the accounting system where the session host worker is actually managed by the Azure portal. I think it will be a very good idea about it. What do you think?
I think there are many ways to achieve that. That's why I think we need to go deeper to understand the circumstances, all right, and what are the acceptable options that customers are willing to look at.
Speaking of that, speaking to that,
Definitely.
what do you think that we actually show a demo about how the Azure Virtual Desktop, the AVD, work in this scenario?
I think that's a very good idea. That's a very
Very
good
good idea.
Go ahead.
Right.
Go
Let's
ahead.
do it. Right.
Wow. Before you guys go on further, you just to alert, we have another 7 minutes on the clock.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lorraine.
This is
Thank
going
you.
to be our last
Okay.
demo that I will do. Then after that, I will pass it to Noel.
Yeah.
Right.
Awesome. Thank you.
So, very good questions, Rajit. So let's talk about the Azure Virtual Desktop solution. Right. So it's a desktop and app virtualization service that run on Azure Stack HCI. And currently still in preview, right? So in customer data center on-premise, with virtualize both the desktop and application, right? So this is a requirement, right? Allowing the employee to access the server, which is actually managed with hybrid solution right, that access the resources that running on premise, for example, the data and also the accounting system. And I got this demo recorded that actually as part of the requirement to show how the Azure Virtual Desktop work in terms of allowing the user to actually access the work environment securely and from the remote location, right? So this is part of the secure remote work from home solution, right? So this is how the web client look like for the Azure Virtual Desktop, and the workloads, the compute workloads is still configured and running on top of Azure Stack HCI in a customer data center. And we are actually, customer actually using the Azure portal to act as the remote station host broker to manage the entire connection and the host pool, right? So once the user is logged in, similar, right? Something like you are using the RDS VDS solution in your on-premise, right? And from here, customer can actually access the departmental folder, for example, that configure as a method drive in the Windows Explorer, right? For example, from here, customer can actually perform document exchange and interaction and collaboration between different departments, right? For example, they can even run the Power BI report dashboard to view the report and so on. Let me fast forward a little bit. Take time to load the thing, right? So this is a Power BI report, right? And you can imagine that you log in as a AVD user, sharing the report. So I'm the supervisor. Hey, I want to see the report, right? And for the sales, right? I log in, and this is the Power BI dashboard that created by the IT team and shared as a report object in the departmental folder, right? So the supervisor just go in and click the report and view it accordingly, right? Based on the requirement. And not limited to that, right? I want to run the accounting system, right? This is what Reggie asked about, right? So I can share the shortcut and publish the app and put the shortcut in the desktop, and the customer can actually use it remotely using the MVD infrastructure, right? Service, right? And from here, the account department staff can actually log in using it and enter their daily transaction, do some report changes, accounting information changes, and so on, right? And fast forward a bit, and not limited to that, right? Of course, very good and well famous are our Microsoft Office tools, right? For example, the Excel, right? And of course, we can have a full capability of running the Microsoft Office platform with this Azure Virtual Desktop environment. Right, from here, you can see here there's an Excel with a sales dashboard is being created and shared among different departments. All right, so this is how the Azure Virtual Desktop can actually help our customers to actually access the environment, the application, right, where the workload is actually running on premise, right, and the entire virtual session host broker, and also the security is actually handled by Microsoft via the Azure portal. All right, so now that's a demo that I would like to illustrate by using the AVD. All right, over to you.
Thank you, Cole. Let me just summarize. All right, we're running very short on time.
Yeah.
Right, I think you managed to, as they say, kill two birds with one stone, right? So that's the COVID solution, as well as being able to access application on-prem and even in the cloud, right? So that said, let's move on to summarize on this wheel of capabilities, if that's the right way to design it and to talk about it. So Azure Stack HCI is an on-premise solution, right? Based on Hyper-V as a hypervisor, gives you software-defined storage with storage spaces direct, and even SDN to connect back up into Azure, or for Azure to come down. Now that said, you saw those services that we talked about, right? In scenario number one, which is more like an a la carte, going to the restaurant and picking the options that you want, or if you're not sure and you want a recommendation, a set of services from Microsoft that works very well together, you can go with Azure Arc. So you have Defender for Cloud, you have Azure Monitor, you have Azure Policy, Azure Automation, Azure Arc for Service, and even Azure Update Management, because these are the best of breed services that most customers would require. And of course, you can table off and place them in a highly resilient, fast, reliable manner, secured with the multi-layer security, both from on-prem and from the cloud. So we get us from a chip to cloud security model, if you want, to run all those services, including just virtual machines, like all the other solutions, but we have added capabilities to take you even further, right, with Azure PaaS services and so forth. It's important to know that from an on-prem perspective, you get a free tool called Windows Admin Center to reach out. Okay, so there are lots and lots of resources out there, right? Not limited to what we have put together, compiled, whether it's on LinkedIn or whether it's on the YouTube channel, right? But there's a lot of resources that Microsoft themselves have put together, right? I urge you to try out the technology. So go do a POC for your customers. Go deploy this into the customer's production environment when they're confident that it's going to work. Keep learning and continue to be excited. You can download the software like Windows Server 2022. There's 180 days eval that you can download. There is also Azure Stack HCI OS that you can download. They started off in the early days with 30 days trial. Now it's gone to 60 days, and that's like a couple of years ago. So with 60 days, we believe that there's ample time for you to even continue to learn it from the cloud study hall, right? Which is an awesome place to get resources, and not to forget there are certifications, right? Certifications will get you going. And I want to end here by saying, try AZ 800 and 801. Truly, this is a Windows Server Hybrid certification path that I think you'll be significantly blessed. Right, and of course, there are lots of free resources to help you prepare, right, including the HCI foundations and so forth. Okay, so that's kind of take us to the end. I know I've probably overrun by a minute or two, right? And of course, there's this white paper to compare with the previous versions that was written by Jeff Woolsey, one of the principal program managers in the product team. All right, back to you, Suraj.
Thank you, Noel, for the wonderful session. It was really interesting to have you and your team explaining. It was interactive, and thank you, team Noel, to be with us, and thank you all for joining with us today. And I hope today's session was helpful. And I would like to remind everyone to fill the attendance form, and the recording will be shortly available in our YouTube channel. And since we are on time, I think you guys might be having something else to be doing since it's a Friday. So yeah, let's wind up today's session, and hope to see you guys in another session as well.
Yes, it is a very
Thank
short
you.
time by now. Okay, take care. All the best. Have a wonderful weekend. God bless you. Bye-bye.
Same. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks.
sir.
Bye.